What a start to the week, gentlemen, when it comes to soccer news, as we welcome everybody into onesoccer.ca, Annie Petrillo, Oliver Platt, and Gareth Wheeler. The big one, gentlemen, the 2022 Euro Championships have come to an end for the women. And all we keep hearing, Ollie, is it's come home. It turned into it's coming home.
Finally came home.
It finally
That's the
home.
World Cup. The World Cup needs to come home.
But a major trophy has definitely arrived in England for the first time since 1966 when the men did win the World Cup. So yes, the Lionesses defeating Germany 2-1 in extra time to claim the Euro title. Scenes were amazing in England. And what was also, this is how long it's been, just to kind of come full circle for you. Queen Elizabeth was the one to hand out the trophy in 1966 because it was hosted in England. And Prince William was on hand yesterday to hand out the trophy to the captain, Leah Williamson. So full circle, even for the royal family to be able to enjoy this. But Ollie, I'll start with you. How big was this win for England?
Yeah, obviously it's massive. It's a tournament win, which doesn't happen very often in England. So there's a lot of kind of off-field stuff, which I know we're going to get into in terms of the magnitude of the occasion at Wembley and the crowd and all of those things. But I was just, throughout this tournament, to be honest, so impressed by this England team. Like it's a team that has come a long way, over the past 10, 15 years and looking ahead from a Canadian perspective to the World Cup next year, like this team looks like it could be a force, right? And I think we're going into that World Cup probably for one of the first times ever. I know it started to change at the last tournament, but probably thinking like it's not just who can beat the USA anymore, right? You're looking at some of these European teams and they've got real quality and depth. Like when you can start with Beth Mead, Fran Kirby, Lauren Hemp, Ellen White as your front four, and then you still got Alessia Russo and Ella Toon to come off the bench. Like this England team was so deep in attack. It almost felt like in that game that if Germany weren't leading at the time those subs came on, they'd be in trouble. I thought Germany stuck around and played better in the second half of that game in an extra time than I probably expected. But eventually England came through and it's a really strong team now going into Australia and New Zealand next year.
I think we were waiting for this for quite some time, weren't we? Like, I feel like every major tournament, England or Great Britain, in terms of the Olympics, has underachieved to a certain degree. And then they just had the momentum of the nation behind them, let alone very good players who were playing at a really good level in domestic league. But didn't both of you get kind of a feel like they're catching lightning in a bottle? Like really, sometimes, like for the men's national team, the weight of the nation is applied like pressure. For here, it was uplifting for this group. And I think it made a significant difference. What this team will look like in Australia, New Zealand next year, I think they'll look a lot different. Like it was just, I think that once they built some momentum, once they came away with a couple big results, there was no stopping this team. There's too much talent and momentum behind them.
Yeah, it can go either way, right? We always find when you're the home nation too, right? To your point, sometimes when you're hosting, you could feel that pressure, and sometimes it can be debilitating. Other times it can be so uplifting for the athletes, and you felt that with this England team. But the tournament as a whole, gentlemen, was such a success. That game alone smashed a record of European attendance across the board, men or women, 87,192. And when you look at the previous Euros as well, held in the Netherlands, they had a total attendance of just over 240,000. This was closer to a total attendance of 600,000. That's attendance. We're not even getting into, viewing numbers or anything either. Although, side note, I'll be the first to say it was very disappointing that this was not available in Canada. But anywho,
I watched it here,
but we didn't exactly watch it on Canadian networks. We're not going to get into it.
I can stream it on my television. I'm able to do that. So
yes, we can. Thank you.
Big TV behind me. I did it.
Thank you for sliding into second base. That's my point. That is my absolute point, because here's the thing. There's such an appetite. I think this has proven that there's such an appetite for women's sport, not just to go to it, but to also be able to watch it. And I guess, does that just kind of really hammer home, Gareth, how, women's soccer should be more readily available?
Well, I did watch it on my television. I fully appreciate that not everyone can. Okay, so let's move on to where the women's game is today. This is great. This is outstanding. I think that this has been coming, but what we need to see is it not come in waves for this to be sustainable. Over the course of the last year, it's been absolutely trending in the right direction. Domestic leagues, attendance growing, this tournament, a home nation getting hot the way they did. But you said back in 2017, 240,000 people attended that game. We just watched and covered the CONCACAF W Championship. Mexico is a football first country. What was the attendance like that for both Mexican national team games as well as the final? And I like to kind of give Canada a little bit of a pat on the back here, because in 2015, we hosted the most successful Women's World Cup at that time. Guess what? Canada, the Canadian women were playing in front of 54,000 people. A final not including the Canadian women's national team in Vancouver. I was in the building. I was covering it. 54,000 people for US Japan. So this isn't anything new. It is to this magnitude, the way that it captured this nation. But now the question is, how do you fully take advantage of this interest? Interest in women's soccer has been there. We saw great crowds for Brazil games at the Olympics in 2016. They got behind the nation. The England supporters got behind this tournament. So how does this game take advantage of these moments, which are absolutely flashpoints, absolutely turning points, and fully take advantage of that? And I'm sure that this upcoming WSL season, I mean, all eyes will be on them, because they're going to start playing games in bigger stadiums, and there's going to be more attention and more coverage. And that's how you start to build this. That's why I think that this tournament was so significant, because England is one of those football nations that's been lagging behind in the women's game for so long. Things have turned around in the last 4 or 5 years, but they've been slow off the mark. A lot of these prominent footballing nations haven't supported their women like the US, like Canada has over the years. They're playing catch up. And I think that we will fully understand of how big the women's game actually is and can be once these other prominent football nations step up, like the way that the England fans and supporters did over this tournament. It really made it a spectacle and really delivered a message to the footballing world.
Yeah, it is about capitalizing on these big flashpoints. I think Wheels is right, and I hope that we do that now in this country. And there's some momentum, obviously, to make that happen on the back of the gold medal last year. But at the same time, I think, I was kind of thinking, like, watching that game and thinking back to where women's football in England has come from just over the last 15 years. And like, I think in the moment, sometimes progress can feel very slow. But when you look at how much it's grown over the last decade, 2 decades, like, it's significant, right? Like, just this morning, I saw Arsenal tweeted a photo of Leah Williamson as a mascot with Kelly Smith at a game 15 years ago. I was actually at that game because it was in Milton Keynes. Leah Williamson's from Milton Keynes. And that was around the time where, if you were a football fan, you were starting to hear more about the England women's team. Kelly Smith, Karen Carney, Farrah Williams. People were starting to pay more notice to these names. But at the same time, like, that game was played in a field hockey stadium in front of 5,000 people. So like, it's a lot different from what we're talking about now, with this team playing in front of a packed Wembley, playing at all the stadiums they played at during this tournament. And I think we've gradually seen it from that kind of first team that started to compete at World Cups to the Team GB team in 2012 that drew big crowds at the London Olympics, to where they are now. Like I said, it can feel slow in the moment. Sometimes it is too slow and we want it to come quicker. Yeah. But at the same time, we are starting to see in a lot of different countries that there is real progress. When you look back now over 15, 20 years, like, there's big steps being taken. So, we're seeing that in England with the WSL establishing itself as probably the top league in the world now. I hope we can start to see over the next 10 years in Canada the same kind of things happening off the back of what our women's team has been doing at the Olympics for some years now.
I know I might sound a little biased, obviously, when I'm talking about women's sport, but I appreciate the push. I'm part of that push to get it at a level already here. But to your point, it feels slow because I think sometimes we compare it to where the men's game is already. But we have to remember the men's game's been around for a century. Like, it's been around for 100 years. And for 100 years, the men have been doing what they've been doing to try and perfect it, to get it to a certain level. So for women to already do that in 2 decades or so is already really impressive. So in some ways it is fast, but I can understand where in some ways it can feel pretty slow. I mean, gentlemen, I put you onto that limited series about the English Premier League, for crying out loud, where it was just right in the 90s and stuff, and how they really had to turn things around. I mean, we've seen the ebbs and flows of the men's game and how it takes and what it takes to get to here.